welcome to episode 3 of the CCS ESSER Roundtable discussion. So far, we have touched upon how the communications, buildings and grounds, and safety security responded, prepared, and provided support for CCS students, families, and staff during the unprecedented COVID-19 closure. In this episode, we are talking to Joe Brown, the Director of Food and Services, and Rodney Stufflebean, the Executive Director of Transportation. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start with a brief introduction of what your department does and how your department supports teaching and learning. Who would like to start us?
Sure. The Office of Food Service has a really direct impact on students. There's numerous studies have shown that a well-nourished student is better prepared to learn in the classroom. So we take that role very serious. So we feed students, or students have the opportunity to eat breakfast and lunch every day in their school. We encourage them to take advantage of that so that they're ready to go once their teachers start teaching.
Great, thank you.
And the transportation department, obviously, we're tasked with bringing the students to school every day so that they can learn. And then we take them back home in the evenings, back to their families so that they can finish out their days and be prepared for the next day.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I can just tell you that as a student that rode the bus every day to school and was brought home and obviously ate lunch every day at school, you are correct. It's definitely without you, we can't have school, we can't have learning. We're not prepared, right? So let's go back, if you will, to March 13th, 2020. Governor DeWine is on TV. And he orders the statewide school closures for the entire state. What went through your mind?
Well, I can speak to that one. I was not here at this district. I was at my previous district, much smaller district out in Licking County, and I was actually driving a bus that day. So we were sitting at the high school waiting for dismissal when the word came down that this was our last day. I was in shock. I really wasn't sure what this was going to look like or how it was going to be going forward. I think everybody had some anxiety about the pandemic itself, and this was another layer to that now. The normalcy of going to school every day was not going to happen the next day, and we didn't know how long. So for myself, it was shock and uncertainty.
My story actually started the day before, on the 12th.
Okay.
I was in Washington, D.C. that week at a school nutrition conference, and when this was all kind of taking shape, and I remember getting on the airplane to come home, and just as a coincidence, sitting next to me was a member of City Council.
Oh.
And he said to me, what would happen if the city shut down and school shut down? Would we still be able to feed kids? And I remember thinking to myself, well, God, that's never going to happen. But we'll take care of it. Kids will be fed. And obviously went home that night not thinking that much of it. Obviously, the next day, he obviously had a lot more insight than I did. Mm-hmm. Things shut down. And we knew right away that one of our responsibilities would be to make sure students have an opportunity for healthy meals when not in school, much like we do during the summer or different times of the years when students don't have the ability to get meals in the school.
Mm-hmm. So, gentlemen, could you help us understand how your departments responded, prepared, and supported remote learning?
So, ultimately, like I said, our biggest responsibilities is to make sure that students and children within the community had access to food. One of the things that was helpful for us is the USDA and the Ohio Department of Education loosened regulations on what and how we could feed students. Mm-hmm. So that gave students the opportunity to come to our schools, pick up meals, take them home with them. And we started that planning immediately. And by the beginning of the next week, we had that in place. So students were able to come to schools, pick up food, so that they were able to continue with their life and be able to make sure things were taken care of.
And if memory serves me correctly, we also were able to provide some food for them during the weekends as well?
So we did it a number of different ways. We learned things as the pandemic went on and changed things. Initially, we served 1 day's worth of food on a given day. We gave them a lunch or a breakfast when they came in, and then we gave them a sack meal for the next meal. Because initially that's what we had the food to do and what we were allowed to do. Over the course of the pandemic, we expanded that to be meal packs that were available for longer periods of time. To be able to feed students and become less of a challenge for them to get to our sites to be able to pick up meals.
Yeah. Great.
And for transportation, when it transitioned to remote learning, one of the things that we were able to do was equip some vehicles or buses with Wi-Fi. So for students that did not have internet access at their home, we could park buses out strategically within the neighborhoods and open up the internet access to them so that they could continue to do the remote learning. And we continued through that until it was time to transition to the next step of the process.
Yeah, so both of your departments really helped mitigate some of those immediate roadblocks, if you will, to teaching and learning. And I know I heard from my students at the time that it, really helped them feel a little more secure in what was happening in a world that literally had turned upside down, right? Without any notification. When we think about the remote teaching and learning and all of the changes that immediately had to happen, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I felt like we had just gotten our footing on remote teaching and learning and how to operate, and then we were able to come back to hybrid. So could you talk to us about some of those changes that had to occur for hybrid teaching and learning, and how those procedures, systems, and structures changed, what went on behind the scenes to make those changes?
For transportation, it was much different than what we're used to. We focus on maximizing the capacity of a bus and minimizing the time, and you have a 65 passenger bus that you want to put 65 students on. And with the guidelines that were put in place for the hybrid learning, you had the social distancing, you had the no gathering as a group together, you had to be the 3 foot apart. So that changed our process, and the routing alone, you're not utilizing the maximum capacity of a bus, and you're maybe getting 15 to 20 kids maximum on a bus. So that increases the number of drivers you need, the number of routes. Splitting the cohorts up, you had a cohort A, cohort B, these went on this day, these students went on these days. Nobody had ever done that before. So it brought to light a lot of the issues with some of the equipment that we use, and it's not designed for that. It's designed to maximize it, and there was no easy way to break that up. So it became a difficult task. Again, I was not here in that capacity. I can't speak to a lot of the roadblocks that they ran into. I know that was one of the key features with every district in the state, is how do you create social distancing on a bus that's meant to maximize the capacity of that bus by sitting 2 or 3 to a seat. Those were some of the things that we dealt with at my other district, and they dealt with here.
So I think you're right on when you said, we figured one thing out and then we had to pivot. We became really good at adjusting on the fly. Because I think that's absolutely true. We would have something in place. And as soon as you put something in place, you learn something. Takes you a little bit of time to work out the kinks, figure out how it works best. And it seemed like during our pandemic, we would do that and then would have to pivot again. And remote learning was one of those. When all the students were at home, it was simpler in regards that we prepared meals for students to pick up. Now we had to be able to have meals for students to pick up, as well as have meals for students that are in the building. So we were running 2 systems at the same time beside each other. So it was challenging. Challenging for our staff. Our staff had to work very hard. They had to work additional hours. They get 100% of the credit, though, because they were committed to making sure we had everything we could do to be able to take care of our students through this tough and difficult time.
And that brings to light another one that I think a lot of us have forgotten about for the transportation. We had to come up with a disinfecting plan and safety shields for our drivers. How do they operate? Is ODE going to allow us to use plexiglass and things of that nature? But the disinfecting equipment and things of that nature, we didn't have that on hand. So we had to research what's best. How do we get enough of it to do what we need to do? How do we build that into the schedules? Our drivers worked far more hours than they typically would. It kind of piggybacks on what Joe said. We adapt and we pivot when we need to, and we develop what we need to develop to get the job done.
I think a lot of people forget that the PPE was more than just masks, right?
Absolutely.
The disinfectant, the way food was handled. I mean, I remember when the pandemic first started, we weren't even sure if, we had to wash down our groceries, right? So it's more than just putting on a mask, being 3 feet apart from each other. We had this whole disinfecting thing going on behind the scenes as well to make sure when our students did come for hybrid, everybody was safe. And we talked about that yesterday with Building and Grounds, about how they were coming in to the schools and helping get those plexiglass barriers on and all of these things we've never done before. It made for a very interesting classroom situation for everybody.
For us, we had to work hand in hand with the Highway Patrol and ODE because of the construction standards of buses. So there's a committee, the Ohio School Bus Construction Standards Committee, that oversees everything that's on a bus. So if it's not authorized by that committee, you can't do it. So as a collaborative, we had to sit down across the state and say, okay, how do we put hand sanitizer stations on a bus? How do we put plexiglass barriers? What's going to be approved? Is it going to affect the safety of the bus and the students if there is an accident? So it was a major undertaking to make sure that we could adequately provide the things the students needed and keep them safe in doing so with the features that needed to be done.
That's interesting. Thank you for that insight. When we're talking about our ESSER funding, we know that we were able to purchase the PPE. We were able to purchase at some staffing and other supplies needed during this time. If we could just think about the ESSER funding and how it impacted your department's capacity and the strategies to support student achievement. What were some of those lessons that you learned because of the ESSER funding? Things that might have come to light, inequities, anything that you realized because we had this additional funding, we were able to do something different?
So we didn't utilize a ton of ESSER funding for a ton of different ESSER projects, but the one place where it really did make a difference for us is by federal regulation. The Food Service Fund is a standalone fund. So we need to be we are not intended to take funds from the general fund to be able to provide meals to students. We're supposed to operate in a cost-neutral environment based on revenue we bring in for reimbursement and our costs that go out. During the pandemic, that model was very much challenged, not just here, but all throughout the country. There were supply chain shortages. There was costs going up for items. There was increased staff hours to be able to take care of our students. There was decreased revenue because even though we were open and available all those places, not all of our students needed that extra support. So we did see a decrease in revenue. So what the ESSER funds really did was keep us whole. They kept us whole so that we could, when the pandemic came around and ended, we were still in a place where we were able to take care of our students and not be a draw on the general fund, so that those funds could still focus on the teaching and learning of students.
As for us, we also are funded differently a little bit. We get state reimbursement from our counts for our riderships and our mileage. if you're not transporting and you're not driving miles, those are going to be reduced. So ESSER funds were used for some of those situations. Again, the PPE gear, a lot of the things that we had to retrofit to make available and make sure it was safe on a bus, that took time and funds. For us, it was some additional staffing that we were able to identify. We brought in additional call center reps under the ESSER funds. And since we saw the impact of their customer service rates improved, so we've moved them from ESSER funds to general funds. We have some secretary positions that were developed due to ESSER funds. We're working to roll as many of those into general fund as we can. One of the things that we were able to also identify is that our department needed a meaningful professional development program that was providing our staff with the tools and the resources to deal with things that nobody really thought about before. And we wanted to, for lack of better terms, move up on the rung of a ladder. So we've developed with our person a kind of more robust professional development with centered ideas of how to help the students be successful in their days. If we can help them be successful, then we'll be more successful, and it's kind of a trickle effect. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we worked on and that we hope to complete is the position for the professional development moving from ESSER to general funds. We've seen a change in our culture of our drivers. We're raising the bar a little bit and defining what expectations are. And all of that would not have happened if it would not have been for the pandemic and ESSER funds. You know, those gave us the ability to see a little bit clearer of what our needs are. And so we're going to work diligently to make sure that the things we identified during this process that were very, very beneficial, we keep.
Mm-hmm. Which brings me actually to our last question. Can we think about our lessons learned? What were some of the biggest lessons that came out of the pandemic, the ESSER funding, impacts that the ESSER funding had, and sustainability that is coming from having those ESSER funds and sustaining what we needed to sustain now that the funding is coming to an end?
A lot of our business is driven by regulatory requirements. Mm-hmm. During the time of the pandemic, there was relief on a lot of those requirements that enabled us to be able to feed children differently and look at the way we feed children differently. Since then, all of those regulations have come back into place. So because of that, it forces us to go back to where we were before. So some of the things we did like in regarding being able to give students meals to take with them, things like that, we're no longer permitted to do. So we did learn some things through it. The regulations have pulled us back where we can't do that. The one overwhelming thing, though, I think that we took away from the pandemic that is a positive, showed us we can do anything to take care of our kids. We understand that our students need us, and it's important. And like I said, the pivoting and the transitioning that we did during the pandemic is something that if you would have asked us before that, if we can turn that quickly and evolve that quickly, we would have said, no, we're large, we're a big moving ship, it takes time to turn it. But during the pandemic, we learned how to do that. We learned how to pivot quickly. People realized that they can do things that they thought maybe they couldn't before that. So that is definitely a positive that we carried with us after the pandemic and that we continue to use.
For us, this is difficult. In transportation, we refer to pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Again, I was at a different school district, much smaller school district prior to coming here, and we were seeing signs of driver shortages before the pandemic. Sub drivers were not available as much. You seem to have to work a little bit harder to find adequate number of drivers to keep you with a sustainable amount of staff to keep doing the job. And then the pandemic happened, and we're not really certain, at least I'm not, what changed the mentality over that period of time. But when we came out of the pandemic and we moved back into more of the normalcy, the biggest thing we see now is, and it's not just Ohio, it's not just CCS, it's nationwide, is we have a driver shortage. Prior to the pandemic, we had over 760 drivers. We were transporting the same number of students we are right now. We had about 706 routes. And post-pandemic, we have about 469 drivers right now. We've had to become resourceful in reducing routes, maximizing capacity, doubling, adding tiers, because our pool of drivers that we would recruit from is not there. We average about, I think our highest number of class this year has been 15 in the training class, and we're just, we started the school year this year with about 486 drivers, and as I said this morning, we're down to 452 active drivers. So not only are we facing it, the state of Ohio is facing it, the nation is facing this problem. But yet we still have the same number of students to transport, which makes it extremely difficult. So we're looking at every resource possible, every scenario possible to do more with less, and that's extremely hard to do when you're dealing with a situation like that. It also brought to light some of the issues with the legislation that has been enacted in the state. I refer to House Bill 110 and House Bill 33. Prior to COVID, prior to the enacting of both of those House bills, there was charter non-public schools had no means of filing complaints. So House Bill 110 brought into the process of a non-compliance procedure for charter non-publics that if, for instance, we're short and we have 56 people call off today, and we don't have enough people to run those routes, so we have to double up, triple up, and do whatever we can to provide the service, which in turn requires us to possibly be late for picking up or dropping off. They put a 30-minute window in there that if we're beyond 30 minutes, the school can file a complaint against us and we can lose funding. And then that was revamped again with House Bill 33 and changed the rules again on us. And so how we navigate that now has become a difficult task. And we're not certain how to address it when we want to do better. We want to make sure every student gets to school every single day. But when you're in the midst of a nationwide staffing shortage, how do you do that? If you don't have people to meet the numbers of routes you need to accomplish the job, it's a near impossible task. And now with the enacting of both of those House bills, we're going to lose funding. So it's a vicious circle, and there's no simple fix to it. We've held meetings with ODE. We've held meetings with our charter non-publics. We're trying to rectify the situation, but it seems like it's all or none, and we're against everything, and we're doing everything we possibly can to improve that and bring people in. You know, we've looked at possibilities. Currently, we use 2 vendors to help offset the shortage. Even our vendors are struggling. They can't find drivers. So the biggest thing that we've seen post-pandemic is the nationwide driver shortage and how it's affecting every school district in the United States. And there is no underlying reason. Nobody can pinpoint why. It's not the pay. It's not the benefits. We've tried all of those. I think at that point, through the pandemic, the clientele that we sought to fill those positions found other means, and it doesn't seem that it's coming back to us, and this may be the new norm, and we just got to figure out how to pivot and adjust. And that may mean internal policies need changed, guidelines need changed. There has to be some collaboration to fix this. No sole entity is going to fix it on their own.
And we certainly don't want another worldwide pandemic.
No, by no means.
to help
Right.
the funding issue, right?
Correct.
So, just is there any other parting words that you would like our audience to know about your departments and the impact that ESSER funding has had on your departments?
For us, again, we'll go to some of the positives. We learned that we needed some additional staffing positions to help us with our customer relations. That's been key for us. Whereas our services, we're working diligently to improve those services, but our customer service ratings have went up. We've identified areas where we could fix things. The only other thing we would ask would be to understand our situation, show us a little bit of grace while we're doing this. We are working our tails off, and the current staff we have is working amazing hours, and the work we do every day is all because of them. And just we ask that you know what our situation is, that you work with us and show us a little bit of grace, and we're going to work to find a resolution to it. We just don't know how quickly we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for us, the biggest benefit is it kept us whole. Mm-hmm. If it didn't happen, we would be in a very severe cost-cutting mode right now. And when you cut costs, you impact staffing, you impact food quality, you impact choices for students. And that can be a vicious spiral down. So it enabled us to stay whole, to be able to keep getting better, to keep improving on what we do for our kids. So,
I have always said, I've been in the district now 26 years, and I've always said that the CCS family is some of the hardest working, most dedicated people that you will ever find in any district. And I think the pandemic showed that in our ability to pivot so quickly, that our ESSER funding was used to help identify some of those areas that needed to be improved and gave us the opportunity to make some much needed changes. And it sounds like both of your departments are able to sustain some of those greater needs. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us today.
thank
Thank
you.
you for having us.